Farrah Fawcett was the most famous woman in America. She had the looks, the fame, and the success, until Hollywood turned its back on her. And when she needed the world most, it was too busy watching someone else. Small-town Texas to Hollywood dreams. Farrah Fawcett was born on February 2, 1947 in Corpus Christi, Texas. Even as a child, people took notice. Classmates, teachers, even strangers. She wasn't just beautiful, she had an effortless charisma that made her stand out. At W.B. Ray High School, she was voted Most Beautiful all 4 years, a school record. But beauty wasn't her focus. She had a sharp mind and planned to study microbiology at the University of Texas at Austin. That plan didn't last long. A photographer saw her yearbook picture and sent it to a Hollywood agent. Within weeks, she was flooded with modeling offers. Her parents were hesitant. Hollywood was unpredictable and they wanted stability for their daughter. But Farrah had options. She continued her studies, balancing classes with commercial shoots for beauty products and fashion campaigns. By 1968, she made the leap. She left Texas for Los Angeles with the goal of becoming an actress. Success didn't come overnight. She appeared in shampoo commercials, did minor TV guest spots, and took on small modeling gigs. Her first major contract was with Screen Gems, the studio behind Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie. It was a foot in the door, but big roles were still out of reach. Her first credited role came in 1969 on Mayberry RFD, followed by appearances on The Flying Nun and The Partridge Family. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work. She took whatever she could get, knowing all it took was one role to change everything. That role came in 1974 when she landed a recurring part on Harry O. She played Sue Ingram, the neighbor of the lead detective, for 8 episodes. The show got her noticed, but it wasn't enough to make her a household name. Then came The $6 Million Man. Cast as Steve Austin's love interest, she gained even more visibility. She also caught the attention of the show's star, Lee Majors. The two became inseparable, and by 1973, they were married. Majors was already an established TV star, and with his guidance, her career started moving faster. But no one, not even Farrah, was prepared for what came next. Becoming a superstar overnight. In 1976, Charlie's Angels premiered on ABC, and Farrah Fawcett became the most famous woman in America, practically overnight. The show was a phenomenon. Farrah, alongside Jaclyn Smith and Kate Jackson, played private detectives working for the unseen Charles Townsend. Her character, Jill Monroe, was the standout. Carefree, confident, and effortlessly cool, she wasn't just another TV character, she was a cultural icon. At the same time, her now famous red swimsuit poster hit stores. It sold 12 million copies, making it the most popular pinup of all time. Every teenage boy had it. Every woman wanted her hair. The Farrah flip became the most requested hairstyle in salons across the country. But behind the glamour, she was drowning in exhaustion. The TV schedule was brutal. 12 to 14-hour days, 6 days a week. On top of that, she had to do endless press tours, photo shoots, and public appearances. Hollywood loved her, but they also controlled her every move. Her marriage with Lee Majors suffered. He was still filming The $6 Million Man and expected her to be home by the time he finished work. She wasn't. By the end of the first season, she had a decision to make: continue on Charlie's Angels or leave at the peak of her success. She chose the latter. ABC wasn't happy. They sued her for breach of contract, demanding $7 million in damages. The case was messy, and ultimately she agreed to return for a few guest appearances to settle the lawsuit. The media called her crazy for leaving a hit show, but she didn't care. She wanted to prove she was more than just TV's golden girl. Hollywood, however, had other plans. Hollywood pushback and career struggles. Leaving Charlie's Angels should have been the moment Farrah Fawcett stepped into serious acting. Instead, it nearly ended her career. In 1978, she starred in Somebody Killed Her Husband, a suspense thriller meant to reinvent her image. The studio hyped it up as a Hitchcock-style mystery, but critics weren't buying it. Roger Ebert called it a slow-moving, uninspired mess. Audiences weren't interested either. The film bombed at the box office. It didn't just underperform, it humiliated her. Hollywood took it as proof she wasn't leading lady material. She was slapped with the dreaded TV actress label, a death sentence for credibility in film. Directors didn't see her as serious. Producers assumed she lacked depth. She was offered more fluff roles, light comedies, throwaway dramas, none of which aligned with what she wanted. Determined to shake the stigma, she tried again with Sunburn in 1979. It was a crime comedy pairing her with Charles Grodin. On paper, it looked promising. In reality, it was another misfire. Critics were unimpressed. Audiences barely noticed. Farrah's second attempt at big screen stardom fizzled out just as quickly as the first. By the early 80s, she was at a crossroads. The industry didn't respect her, and her career had lost momentum. But instead of accepting defeat, she took a risk no one saw coming. She pivoted to Broadway. In 1983, she took on the lead role in Extremities, a brutal, emotionally charged play about a woman fighting back against an attacker. It was the polar opposite of anything she'd done before, raw, violent, and deeply disturbing. Hollywood had never given her material like this, so she found it herself. The response? Explosive. Audiences were stunned. Critics finally saw her as a real actress. The New York Times praised her performance as harrowing and fearless. She earned standing ovations nightly. For the first time in her career, no one was talking about her hair, her looks, or her past as an angel. They were talking about her talent. Forgotten film career. Farrah Fawcett will always be remembered for Charlie's Angels, but many forget that she continued working well into the 90s and 2000s, taking on challenging roles that rarely got the recognition they deserved. After her Golden Globe nomination for Extremities in 1986, she was finally being taken seriously as an actress. She continued her streak of gritty, dramatic roles in TV movies, including Poor Little Rich Girl, The Barbara Hutton Story, 1987, Double Exposure, The Story of Margaret Bourke-White, 1989, and Small Sacrifices, 1989. The latter, based on true events, had her portraying Diane Downs, a mother convicted of shooting her own children. The role earned her another Golden Globe nomination and critical praise. In the 90s, she continued choosing projects that broke away from her sex symbol image. One of her most daring roles was in Robert Duvall's 1997 film The Apostle, where she played the estranged wife of a troubled preacher. The film was highly praised by critics, with many calling it one of the best performances of her career. But even with acclaim, it was clear that Hollywood wasn't offering her the same big-budget films that other actresses of her era were getting. Still, she worked steadily. Her 2000 TV movie, Jewel, was another strong performance, earning her a third Golden Globe nomination for her portrayal of a mother raising a child with Down syndrome. By the early 2000s, though, work slowed down. The industry was changing. Younger actresses dominated Hollywood, and casting directors were less interested in veteran stars. She made headlines more for her personal life than for her career. By the mid-2000s, offers dwindled. Her last major acting credit was a guest appearance on The Guardian in 2003, for which she received an Emmy nomination, a reminder that her talent never faded even if the industry moved on. Lee Majors, Ryan O'Neal, and a public scandal. Farrah Fawcett and Lee Majors looked like Hollywood's golden couple, but behind the scenes their marriage was unraveling. By the late 1970s, they were more like roommates than partners. Majors had traditional expectations. He wanted a wife waiting at home when he finished work. Farrah, however, was the biggest TV star in America, balancing grueling filming schedules, promotional tours, and endless magazine covers. The time apart was too much. By 1979, they had unofficially separated. The breakup wasn't ugly, but it was inevitable. Farrah had outgrown the role of the doting wife, and Majors couldn't accept her skyrocketing fame. Their divorce was finalized in 1982, but Farrah had already moved on to Ryan O'Neal. Ryan O'Neal and Farrah Fawcett's relationship was a Hollywood roller coaster, passionate, volatile, and endlessly complicated. They first got together in 1979, shortly after her split from Lee Majors. Ryan was already a major star, known for Love Story, 1970, and Barry Lyndon, 1975. Their chemistry was instant, but so was the drama. For years, they were one of Hollywood's most talked-about couples, but behind the scenes things weren't as glamorous. Their relationship was off and on for decades, marked by explosive fights, reconciliations, and long periods of separation. In 1997, they briefly split after Ryan admitted to cheating on her, but no matter how many times they walked away, they always seemed to find their way back. Friends described them as madly in love but constantly at war. O'Neal later admitted, "Farrah and I fought like a couple of lions." And they did. Screaming matches, breakups that never lasted, and moments of bliss that never lasted either. When Farrah was diagnosed with cancer in 2006, Ryan became her primary caregiver. He stood by her side through grueling treatments, hospital visits, and painful setbacks. He later admitted, "I never left her side for 3 years." As her condition worsened, Ryan publicly announced his intention to marry her. He told the press, "I will ask her to marry me again. We will." But time was not on their side. By the time he formally proposed, Farrah was too weak to respond. He later reflected, "She never said yes, but she didn't say no." A mother's heartbreak and legal battles. She had faced career setbacks, industry battles, and a highly publicized love life, but nothing compared to the pain of watching her only son, Redmond ONeal, spiral out of control. Born on January 30th, 1985, Redmond was the child of 2 Hollywood icons, Farrah and Ryan O'Neal. From the outside, he had every advantage: wealth, privilege, and parents who could open doors most could only dream of. But his reality was far from glamorous. Even as a child, those close to the family saw signs of trouble. He struggled with anger, impulse control, and drug experimentation at a young age. By his teenage years, his rap sheet was growing faster than his resume. Arrests for heroin possession, DUIs, probation violations, and drug-related incidents became routine. Each time, Farrah stepped in, paying for rehab, hiring the best lawyers, and pulling strings to keep him out of prison. But no amount of money or influence could stop the cycle. One of the most gut-wrenching moments came in 2008, when Farrah was fighting for her life. Redmond had been arrested again, this time for drug possession while on probation. She was too sick to appear in court, but she made sure her voice was heard. Through her representatives, she begged the judge for leniency, urging the court to give her son another chance. "The one thing I will never give up on is Redmond," she said. Redmond continued his run-ins with the law, bouncing in and out of rehab and prison. In 2018, he was arrested again, this time for attempted murder, armed robbery, and drug possession. Authorities described him as a danger to society. Cancer, media intrusion, and the final fight. In 2006, Farrah Fawcett was diagnosed with anal cancer, a rare and aggressive disease. She kept it private at first, confiding in close friends and family while undergoing radiation and chemotherapy at the renowned Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. She approached treatment with the same determination that had fueled her career, refusing to let the illness define her. By 2007, there was a glimmer of hope. Her doctors confirmed that the cancer was in remission. It seemed like she had won. But just months later, in May 2007, the disease returned. And this time, it was worse. The cancer had spread to her liver, making conventional treatment less effective. Farrah wasn't willing to accept defeat. She sought experimental treatments in Germany, where doctors offered cutting-edge therapies not yet approved in the U.S. She endured painful stem cell treatments, embolization procedures, and alternative therapies, anything that might give her a chance. While she fought for her life, the media turned her illness into a spectacle. Paparazzi stalked her at hospitals, snapping photos of her in moments meant to be private. Then came the ultimate invasion. Her confidential medical records were leaked to the press. The public suddenly knew details about her treatment, prognosis, and declining health before she could even process them herself. Farrah fought back. She sued the UCLA Medical Center where an employee had illegally accessed her records. The hospital admitted to the breach and multiple staff members were fired, but the damage was already done. Despite the chaos, she decided to take control of her own story. She filmed her battle, raw and unfiltered, turning the footage into a documentary, Farrah's Story. When it aired in May 2009, it was watched by 9 million people. Audiences saw her pain, her determination, and her refusal to let cancer steal her dignity. But by the time the special aired, her fight was nearly over. The world had just witnessed her final battle, and there was nothing left to do but wait. Her time was running out. The overlooked goodbye. On June 25, 2009, Farrah Fawcett lost her battle with cancer at 62 years old. It wasn't a sudden death. Her health had been deteriorating for months. Those closest to her knew the end was near. She spent her final days in a hospital in Santa Monica, surrounded by a few loved ones. Ryan O'Neal never left her side. Her only son, Redmond ONeal, was in jail at the time. Despite his legal troubles, authorities granted him a brief visit to say goodbye. He arrived in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, escorted by law enforcement. It was a heartbreaking sight. His mother dying in a hospital bed, while he sat at her side, shackled. The moment was brief, but it was all he was allowed. The world had followed Farrah's cancer battle through her self-produced documentary, Farrah's Story, which aired just 6 weeks before her death. Nearly 9 million people tuned in to watch her unfiltered struggle. It was raw, emotional, and gave the public a first-hand look at her strength. Despite her vulnerability, she refused to let her illness define her. Early that morning, news of her passing spread. Hollywood prepared tributes, TV networks planned retrospectives, and fans mourned. But within hours, everything changed. That same afternoon, Michael Jackson was pronounced dead. The biggest pop star in the world, gone at 50 years old. The news cycle immediately shifted. Every major network, website, and newspaper dropped their planned Farrah tributes to cover Jackson's sudden death instead. His passing became a global media event. Farrah's death, once front-page news, was now an afterthought. By evening, she was barely a headline. For many, the timing felt unfair. Here was a woman who had spent years fighting for respect beyond her looks, and in her final moments, she was once again pushed to the background. Her funeral was small and private, held at the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels in Los Angeles. Ryan O'Neal was there, devastated. Redmond was escorted in chains, allowed to attend under strict supervision. The media might have moved on quickly, but those who truly loved her never forgot. To them, she wasn't just a TV icon. She was a fighter, a mother, a woman who refused to be defined by anyone else's narrative. Her final battle wasn't just against cancer, it was against the way the world saw her. The fight over Farrah's fortune. Farrah Fawcett built a legacy worth $20 million, but when she passed in 2009, her estate didn't rest peacefully. Instead, it became a high-profile legal battle that exposed tensions between her closest relationships and revealed surprises about her final wishes. Her will was meticulously planned. She ensured her son, Redmond ONeal, received $4.5 million in a protected trust, guaranteeing financial support despite his legal troubles and struggles with addiction. Portions of her estate also went to charities, close friends, and her alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin. But one name was missing: Ryan O'Neal. Despite being her on-again, off-again partner for 3 decades, Ryan wasn't listed as a beneficiary. He didn't receive money, property, or any official part of her estate. It was a shocking omission, fueling speculation about where their relationship truly stood at the time of her passing. The biggest dispute centered around a priceless Andy Warhol painting of Farrah, estimated to be worth millions. The University of Texas claimed she had left it to them as part of her final wishes. Ryan, however, disagreed completely. He insisted the painting was his, stating that Farrah had personally gifted it to him years earlier. The university wasn't backing down. They sued Ryan for possession, arguing that the painting was legally theirs and should remain in their collection. The legal battle dragged on for years, with Ryan fiercely contesting the claim. By 2013, a jury ruled in Ryan's favor, allowing him to keep the Warhol portrait. The decision was controversial, reigniting debates about whether Farrah had truly wanted him to have it, or if he had simply taken it after her death. Even though he won the case, the fight over the painting left unanswered questions. Had Farrah purposely left Ryan out of her will? Had their relationship deteriorated more than he publicly admitted? What should have been a straightforward estate settlement became yet another chapter of turmoil in her story. Even in death, Farrah Fawcett's legacy was not left in peace. Kim Novak, the stunning star of Vertigo, was once Hollywood's brightest light. But at the height of her fame, she vanished. How did she rise to fame so quickly, and why did she step away from it all? From Chicago dreamer to Hollywood star. She was born as Marilyn Pauline Novak on February 13, 1933 in Chicago, Illinois. Her parents were Joseph and Blanche Novak. Joseph worked as a history teacher and her mother was a factory worker. Marilyn grew up in a modest household and attended William Penn Elementary, Farragut High School, and Wright Junior College. After high school, she briefly attended the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. In the early 1950s, Novak worked as a model and a dental assistant. Her breakthrough came when she won 2 modeling contests, Miss Deep Freeze and Miss Refrigerator, during a promotional tour. This led to a contract with Columbia Pictures. Studio head Harry Cohn saw potential in her and suggested a name change. Marilyn Novak became Kim Novak, starting her journey into Hollywood. Her first significant role was in the 1954 film Pfft, starring opposite Judy Holliday and Jack Lemmon. Her performance caught the industry's attention. That same year, she appeared in Pushover alongside Fred MacMurray, further establishing her as a rising star. The turning point came in 1955 with the film Picnic. She played Madge Owens, a small-town girl yearning for excitement. Directed by Joshua Logan, the film was a critical and commercial success, earning her a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer. Critics praised her performance, with Bosley Crowther of the New York Times calling her an exciting discovery. In 1956, she starred in The Man with the Golden Arm with Frank Sinatra. Her portrayal of Molly, a woman dealing with a drug-addicted lover, showed her range as an actress. The film was nominated for 3 Academy Awards and further solidified her position in Hollywood. Novak's iconic role came in 1958 with Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Playing dual roles as Madeline Elster and Judy Barton, she starred opposite James Stewart. The film initially received mixed reviews, but is now considered one of the greatest films of all time. Hitchcock, known for his meticulous direction, praised her performance, noting that her portrayal was crucial to the film's success and that she brought a nuanced depth essential for the story's psychological complexity. Her rise to fame was meteoric. By the late 1950s, she was among the top box office draws, often compared to contemporaries like Marilyn Monroe and Grace Kelly. She worked with leading directors and co-stars, including William Holden, Tyrone Power, and Frederick March. Despite her success, she remained grounded. In interviews, she often spoke about the pressures of fame. "I never wanted to be a star. I wanted to be an actress," she told the Saturday Evening Post in 1957. Her humility and dedication to her craft endeared her to fans and colleagues alike. By the end of the decade, Kim Novak had firmly established herself as a major Hollywood star. Her journey from a Chicago girl to a celebrated actress was marked by hard work, talent, and a bit of luck. The Hitchcock Effect. Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, released in 1958, became a defining moment in Kim Novak's career. This psychological thriller, now hailed as one of the greatest films ever made, paired her with James Stewart. She played dual roles, Madeline Elster and Judy Barton, a complex portrayal that showcased her acting depth. The film's production was intense. Hitchcock, known for his exacting standards, pushed Novak to deliver a performance that would leave a lasting impact. Her preparation for the role was meticulous. To embody Madeline, a character steeped in mystery and elegance, she worked closely with costume designer Edith Head. The iconic gray suit she wore became a symbol of the character's haunting presence. Novak mentioned in a Vanity Fair interview, "The suit was like a uniform. It helped me get into Madeline's skin. I felt her tension, her allure." Vertigo required her to switch personas, a task that tested her versatility. As Judy Barton, she portrayed a down-to-earth, working-class woman, a stark contrast to the sophisticated Madeline. This duality in her performance received critical acclaim. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Hitchcock was professional, though not without tension. She once said, "He was demanding, but he respected my craft. There were moments of friction, but they pushed me to give my best performance." Their collaboration on Vertigo left an indelible mark on both their careers. The film's themes of obsession and identity resonated with audiences and critics alike. Her portrayal of a woman caught in a web of manipulation and deceit was compelling. Her ability to convey subtle emotions from fear to seduction was a testament to her skill as an actress. Hollywood's Golden Girl. During the late 1950s, Kim Novak reached the peak of her career, becoming one of Hollywood's most sought-after actresses. This period was marked by a series of successful films that showcased her versatility and solidified her status as a top box office draw. In 1957, she starred in Pal Joey, a musical comedy where she played opposite Frank Sinatra and Rita Hayworth. Her role as Linda English, a nightclub singer, earned her critical acclaim. The New York Times praised her performance, noting, "Novak brings a refreshing charm to her role, balancing wit and vulnerability." Her on-screen chemistry with Sinatra was palpable, contributing to the film's success. The same year, she appeared in Gene Eagles, a biographical drama about the life of the famed Broadway actress. Playing the title role, she portrayed Eagles' tumultuous life, from her rise to fame to her tragic downfall. The film allowed her to demonstrate her dramatic range, earning her a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Drama. Her success continued with Belle, Book and Candle, 1958, where she reunited with James Stewart. This romantic comedy, featuring Novak as a modern-day witch who casts a love spell on Stewart's character, showcased her comedic timing and enchanting screen presence. The film was a commercial hit, adding another feather to her cap. Novak's popularity was not just due to her acting skills, but also her distinctive beauty. She was often compared to Marilyn Monroe, another iconic blonde of the era. However, Novak carved out her own niche, known for her ethereal, almost haunting allure. Photographers and magazines frequently featured her, cementing her status as a Hollywood beauty icon. Despite her glamorous image, she was known for her down-to-earth personality. In a 1958 interview with Life magazine, she said, "I'm just a girl from Chicago who got lucky. I never let the fame get to my head." This relatability endeared her to fans and colleagues alike. Novak's influence extended beyond the silver screen. She became a fashion trendsetter, with her hairstyles and outfits often emulated by women worldwide. Her iconic look in Vertigo, with the platinum blonde hair and tailored suits, became a defining style of the late 1950s. During this time, she also navigated the complexities of her personal life. She had high-profile relationships with several leading men, including Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. Her romance with Davis was particularly controversial due to the racial tensions of the era. Despite societal pressures, Novak was candid about her relationships. In an interview with the Saturday Evening Post, she remarked, "Love is love, regardless of race or status. I followed my heart." Clash with the studio system. Her career in Hollywood was marked by a significant clash with the powerful studio system, particularly Columbia Pictures and its head, Harry Cohn. This struggle for independence and creative control defined much of her professional journey and showcased her resilience in an era dominated by studio moguls. Harry Cohn, known for his tyrannical control over his stars, saw potential in Novak early on. He molded her image, selecting roles, hairstyles, and even relationships to fit the studio's vision. Her natural beauty and talent were undeniable, but Cohn's controlling nature often clashed with her desire for autonomy. "He treated me like a piece of property," she later said in an interview with The Guardian. "I wanted to be an actress, not a puppet." One of the earliest and most significant clashes came during the production of Pal Joey in 1957. Novak wanted to play the role of Linda English her way, bringing depth and nuance to the character. However, Cohn insisted on a more glamorous, superficial portrayal. Despite the tension, her performance received praise, proving her instincts were correct. In 1958, during the filming of Vertigo, Novak faced further challenges. Alfred Hitchcock, although demanding, allowed her more creative freedom than Cohn ever did. This experience highlighted the stark contrast between working under a controlling studio head and a visionary director. Hitchcock respected my craft, she reflected. It was a relief to work with someone who valued my input. The turning point in Novak's battle with the studio system came with Middle of the Night, 1959, a film directed by Delbert Mann. The film, a drama about a May-December romance, was a departure from her typical roles. She insisted on playing the part despite Cohn's reservations. The film received critical acclaim, and her performance was lauded as one of her best. This success bolstered her confidence and solidified her resolve to fight for meaningful roles. However, Cohn's death in 1958 brought both relief and uncertainty. Without his oppressive control, Novak hoped for more freedom. But she also faced a studio in disarray. Columbia Pictures struggled to maintain its status without Cohn's iron fist, and her career trajectory became unpredictable. In the early 1960s, she took bold steps to assert her independence. She turned down roles she felt were beneath her, including high-profile projects that would have guaranteed box office success, but offered little artistic challenge. Her decision to leave Columbia Pictures in 1965 was a significant move. Novak sought to work with directors and studios that offered her creative control. This period saw her taking on diverse roles in films like Kiss Me Stupid, 1964, and The Amorous Adventures of Moll Flanders, 1965. Although these films did not achieve the same level of success as her earlier works, they represented her commitment to artistic integrity, battling her inner demons. Behind the glamorous facade of Hollywood stardom, Kim Novak faced significant personal struggles that deeply affected her life and career. Despite her success on screen, she battled with inner demons and external pressures that took a toll on her mental and emotional well-being. Novak's struggles with mental health were well documented. She experienced bouts of depression and anxiety, conditions that were often exacerbated by the intense scrutiny and relentless pace of Hollywood. In a candid interview with People magazine in 1996, she revealed, "I went through severe periods of depression. It was hard to maintain a facade when I felt like I was falling apart inside." Her issues were not just psychological, she also struggled with physical health problems. In the early 1960s, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, a battle she chose to keep private at the time. This diagnosis added to her stress and led her to reevaluate her career and life choices. Her personal life was also tumultuous. Her high-profile relationships with stars like Frank Sinatra and Richard Johnson were often in the spotlight. Her romance with Sammy Davis Jr. was particularly challenging due to the racial prejudices of the time. In addition to her romantic relationships, Novak had to deal with the pressures of being a female star in a male-dominated industry. The expectations placed on her by the studio system were immense. Harry Cohn, the head of Columbia Pictures, was known for his controlling behavior. He often dictated her role's appearance and public image. This control extended to her personal life, with Cohn even trying to influence her relationships. Novak once remarked that Harry Cohn wanted to control every aspect of her life, describing the experience as suffocating. To cope with the pressures, she turned to painting, a passion she had nurtured since childhood. Art became her sanctuary, a way to express her emotions and find solace. She once said, "Painting saved me. It was a way to escape and process everything I was going through." Her artwork often reflected her inner turmoil and struggles, providing a glimpse into her private world. Despite these challenges, she continued to work in films throughout the 1960s. She starred in The Notorious Landlady, 1962, with Jack Lemmon, and Of Human Bondage, 1964, with Lawrence Harvey. However, the quality of her roles began to decline, partly due to the changing landscape of Hollywood, and partly due to her own battles. The pressures eventually led Novak to seek a quieter life away from the spotlight. By the late 1960s, she had moved to a remote home in Big Sur, California. This retreat allowed her to focus on her health and well-being, away from the prying eyes of the public and media. In her words, "I needed to get away, to find peace and rediscover myself." The mysterious disappearance. At the peak of her fame in the early 1960s, Kim Novak made the surprising decision to retreat from the public eye. Her sudden disappearance from Hollywood left fans and industry insiders speculating about the reasons behind her decision. Her departure was driven by a combination of personal and professional factors that eventually led her to seek a quieter, more fulfilling life. By the mid-1960s, Novak had become disillusioned with the Hollywood lifestyle. The constant scrutiny and relentless pressure took a toll on her mental and physical health. In an interview with The Telegraph in 2014, she candidly admitted, "The demands of being a movie star were overwhelming. I felt like I was losing myself in the process." In 1966, Novak married Richard Johnson, a British actor, in a ceremony that was kept relatively low-key. The couple's relationship was highly publicized, but they sought to keep their personal lives private. Their marriage, although short-lived, was a turning point for her. It was during this period that she began to seriously consider stepping away from Hollywood. Her desire for a more secluded life led her to purchase a ranch in Carmel, California. The ranch became her sanctuary, a place where she could reconnect with herself and pursue her passion for art without the distractions of fame. Her love for painting, which she had nurtured since childhood, provided a therapeutic escape from the pressures of Hollywood. She described this period in an interview with Vanity Fair as a time to heal and rediscover my true self. Novak's decision to leave Hollywood was also influenced by her increasing frustration with the roles offered to her. She had grown tired of being typecast and yearned for characters that challenged her as an actress. In an interview with The Guardian, she expressed her discontent, saying, "I wanted to be more than just a pretty face on the screen. I wanted to explore the depths of my talent." Her retreat was not a complete disappearance. Novak made occasional returns to the screen, choosing projects that intrigued her. One notable comeback was in the 1968 film The Legend of Lila Clare, directed by Robert Aldrich. The film, a dark drama about an actress haunted by the legacy of a deceased star, mirrored some of her own experiences in Hollywood. Although the film received mixed reviews, Novak's performance was praised for its intensity and depth. Unexpected comebacks. While Kim Novak had largely retreated from the limelight, her periodic returns to the screen and public appearances reminded the world of her enduring talent and charisma. These comebacks were selective and often unexpected, reflecting her desire to engage with her art on her own terms rather than under the relentless pressures of Hollywood. One notable return was in the 1980 film The Mirror Cracked, directed by Guy Hamilton and based on Agatha Christie's novel. Novak starred alongside screen legends Elizabeth Taylor and Angela Lansbury. Playing the role of Lola Brewster, a rival actress, she brought a blend of wit and sophistication to the character. The film allowed her to reconnect with the craft she loved without the pressures that once overshadowed her career. In 1991, she appeared in the television film Liebestraum, directed by Mike Figgis. She played a significant supporting role as Mrs. Anderson, a character shrouded in mystery and intrigue. The film's dark, atmospheric tone provided a fitting backdrop for her nuanced performance. Figgis, in an interview with the Los Angeles Times, expressed his admiration for Novak, noting that she brought an incredible depth to the role, with her experience and subtlety adding essential layers to the character. Throughout the years, Novak also made several notable public appearances that captivated audiences and rekindled interest in her life and career. One such moment was at the 2014 Academy Awards, where she was invited to present the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. Standing alongside Matthew McConaughey, Novak received a warm and enthusiastic reception from the audience. Her appearance was met with both admiration and controversy, largely due to her candid discussion about her use of cosmetic surgery. She addressed the criticism with grace, later telling People magazine, "I feel good about myself, and that's what matters." Her return to the public eye in these moments highlighted not only her enduring star power, but also her resilience and ability to navigate the complexities of fame on her own terms. These appearances reminded fans and industry insiders alike of her significant contributions to film and her enduring legacy. Novak's sporadic re-engagement with Hollywood also included interviews and retrospectives. She often participated in discussions about her classic films, sharing insights and behind-the-scenes stories that enriched the audience's understanding of her work. In a 2012 interview with Turner Classic Movies, TCM, Novak reflected on her career, saying, "I've had my ups and downs, but every role, every experience has shaped who I am. I'm grateful for it all." The life Kim Novak leads now. Today she lives a life far removed from the intense spotlight of Hollywood, choosing instead a tranquil existence that allows her to reflect on her remarkable journey and continue her passion for art. Her life in Oregon, where she resides with her husband Robert Malloy, is characterized by peace, creativity, and a connection to nature. Novak's ranch in the picturesque Rogue River Valley offers the perfect backdrop for her artistic pursuits. Here, she finds solace and inspiration in the natural surroundings, which have become a central theme in her artwork. Her love for animals and the outdoors is evident in her paintings, which often depict serene landscapes, horses, and other wildlife. Novak once described her ranch as a sanctuary where I can be myself and express my true feelings through my art. Her commitment to painting has not waned over the years. Novak continues to create and exhibit her work, with her pieces being featured in various galleries and art shows. Her art has been well received, with critics appreciating the emotional depth and unique style she brings to her canvases. Novak has made select public appearances to honor her contributions to the film industry and to connect with new generations of fans. What if I told you that one of television's most beloved sweethearts vanished without a trace? That the woman who once lit up millions of living rooms with a smile quietly stepped away from the spotlight, only to leave behind a trail of eerie silence, strange coincidences, and questions that still haven't been answered? This isn't just another forgotten celebrity story. This is about Laurie Saunders, the bright-eyed star of Petticoat Junction, who seemed to have it all, only to disappear so suddenly. It was like she'd never existed at all. No farewell tour, no final interview, just gone. The more you dig, the more you realize her end wasn't just quiet, it was chilling. And once you hear the facts, you'll never see Laurie Saunders the same way again. A Star is Born. Laurie Saunders wasn't always Laurie Saunders. She was actually born Linda Marie Hines on October 4th, 1941 in Kansas City, Missouri. Pretty regular beginning, nothing flashy, no Hollywood connections, no silver spoon. Just a Midwestern girl who eventually made it big in a way few small-town kids ever do. Her family moved to Los Angeles when she was still young, which is where everything really started to shift for her. Now, Laurie was always into the arts. She loved performing, singing, dancing, acting, the whole deal. You could say she had that classic, born for the stage kind of vibe. She studied acting under the legendary Jeff Corey, a man who trained tons of famous faces, and that really set the foundation for her career. She wasn't just pretty, she was putting in the work early on, sharpening her skills in an industry that chews people up and spits them out if they're not ready. She started doing small stuff, little TV gigs, background parts, commercials, that kind of thing. Nothing major at first, but she was persistent. And then came the role that would change everything. Bobby Jo Bradley on Petticoat Junction. That's when she stopped being Linda Hines and became Laurie Saunders, literally. She changed her name around this time to stand out more in the industry, and it worked. The audience loved her. She stepped into the role in 1965, taking over from another actress, and totally made it her own. That role made her a household name. Overnight, she was this bright, charming face on American TV, playing the sweet, bookish daughter in a wholesome, light-hearted show that people just couldn't get enough of. And while the character might have seemed simple, Laurie had a way of giving Bobby Jo depth and warmth. That was her breakout moment, no question about it. From there, the doors of Hollywood cracked open just wide enough to let her in. The glory days. Getting the role of Bobby Jo Bradley wasn't just luck for Laurie Saunders, it was timing, preparation, and the ability to step into some pretty big shoes. You see, Petticoat Junction had already been on the air for a couple of seasons when the original Bobby Jo, played by Pat Woodell, left the show. That's when Laurie came in. She auditioned and nailed it. The producers needed someone who could bring a fresh energy to the character but still keep the vibe of the show intact. And Laurie had that charm, this mix of sweet and spirited that just clicked. Her version of Bobby Jo was less of the quiet bookworm and more bubbly and full of life. And fans embraced her pretty much immediately, which is no small feat when you're replacing someone beloved. Now, The chemistry between the three actresses who played the Bradley sisters, Laurie Saunders, Meredith McRae, who played Billy Joe, and Linda Kay Henning as Betty Jo, was part of what made the show so addictive. On screen, they felt like real sisters, teasing each other, supporting each other, getting into innocent mischief around the shady rest hotel. But what made it even better was that they genuinely got along off-screen too. There was a real sense of camaraderie behind the scenes, which helped make their performances feel warm and believable. It wasn't all drama and ego like a lot of Hollywood sets, at least not between the girls. They had fun, and that fun translated into the final product. Petticoat Junction was a hit. It was part of that rural comedy wave alongside Green Acres and the Beverly Hillbillies, and people loved it. Laurie became a familiar face in millions of homes across America. She wasn't just playing a role, she became Bobby Joe in the eyes of the public. That's a blessing and a curse. The fame was huge. It brought her recognition, fan mail, and the kind of celebrity status that was hard to ignore. But it also boxed her in. Once the show ended, Hollywood couldn't seem to see her as anything but Bobby Joe. That kind of typecasting was brutal, especially in an industry that already had limited roles for women at the time. Behind the curtains. Behind the scenes, Laurie Saunders lived a life that was a lot quieter than the one most fans imagined. While she played bubbly, charming characters on screen, her personal life was grounded and, honestly, kind of refreshingly normal compared to most Hollywood stories. She married Bernard Sandler, a talent agent, and they stayed together for decades. No scandals, no dramatic tabloid headlines, just a stable marriage in an industry where that's practically unheard of. They also had 2 kids together and raised them outside the public eye, which Laurie seemed to prefer. She wasn't trying to turn her family into some Hollywood dynasty, she just wanted a real life, something solid and away from all the flashing lights. Even during the height of her fame, Laurie didn't come across as someone obsessed with being a celebrity. Sure, she enjoyed the success, the fan mail, the red carpet moments, but she was never one to chase controversy or stir up attention just to stay relevant. That didn't mean she was free from pressure, though. Being on a popular show like Petticoat Junction came with its own kind of stress. There were always expectations to stay young, stay cheerful, stay marketable. That's tough for anyone, but especially for women in Hollywood at the time. You were either the fresh-faced girl next door or yesterday's news, there wasn't much in between. And Laurie fit so perfectly into that sweet, wholesome role that it became hard for casting directors to imagine her as anything else. There were always little rumors floating around, mostly harmless stuff about her possibly retiring early or stepping back because she didn't want to play the game anymore. And honestly, there might be some truth to that. After Petticoat Junction wrapped up and the rural TV trend started fading, her roles got fewer and farther between. She did a few guest spots here and there, like in The Beverly Hillbillies, and movies like Bloodbath and A Day at the White House, but she never had another breakout moment. Some people thought she was pushed out by Hollywood's shifting tastes, while others believed she just decided she was done with it. The reality? It was probably somewhere in the middle. Laurie never made a dramatic exit. She didn't hold a press conference or write a tell-all book. She just quietly stepped back and started focusing on things that made her happy, like art, photography, and working with animals. She wasn't bitter or angry. She didn't try to claw her way back into the spotlight. It was like she had made peace with it all. She'd had her moment, she'd made her mark, and that was enough. In a business built on constant reinvention and attention-seeking, that kind of graceful exit is rare and, honestly, kind of admirable. Her swing at music. Back in the 1960s, Laurie Saunders took a swing at something beyond the screen, music. It wasn't a total left turn, considering the wholesome musical vibes of Petticoat Junction, but it definitely showed another side of her. She released a single titled Lonely Christmas, a soft, melancholic holiday tune that didn't exactly shoot to the top of the charts, but it had that earnest charm fans expected from her. The B-side, Out of Your Mind, was a bit edgier, more of a garage rock gem than a syrupy TV tie-in. It didn't get much attention at the time, but years later, That very song ended up on the cult compilation Girls in the Garage Volume 2, a collection of obscure 60s tracks by female artists that music lovers now treat like buried treasure. Suddenly, decades later, people were rediscovering Laurie Saunders not just as a TV actress, but as a contributor to that gritty, underrated world of vintage girl rock. And it wasn't just a solo venture. Laurie teamed up with her Petticoat Junction co-stars, Linda Kay Henning and Meredith McRae, and together they formed a short-lived singing group called The Girls from Petticoat Junction. It was a classic 1960s marketing move. Take 3 popular TV actresses, put them in matching outfits, and let them sing catchy tunes. But it worked, at least for the fans. They released a few singles, including If You Could Only Be Me in 1968 and 30 Days Hath September. Both songs were sweet, light, and very much of their time. Bubblegum pop meets country twang, with a touch of innocence and girl-next-door appeal. Reception-wise, the music didn't exactly cause a national frenzy, but among Petticoat Junction fans, it was a hit. Kids who watched the show were thrilled to hear Bobby Joe, Betty Joe, and Billy Joe sing together in real life. For them, it was like the show had jumped off the screen and into the record player. The songs weren't revolutionary, but they were catchy and comforting, the kind of tunes you'd expect to hear in a 1960s diner or on an AM radio during a lazy afternoon. Now, those tracks have a second life. The Girls from Petticoat Junction 60s Sounds compilation brought all their recordings together, and nostalgia collectors have embraced it. It's not just fans of the show who care anymore. Vintage music lovers, vinyl collectors, and garage rock enthusiasts have started paying attention. There's this almost retroactive respect now, like people realizing, hey, this wasn't just a cute gimmick, these women were actually putting out solid music for their time. Laurie might have never been a chart-topping singer, but that little pocket of her career, those recordings with her co-stars, showed another layer of her talent. And now, oddly enough, that long-forgotten music is part of how she's being remembered. It's kind of poetic, really. Decades after she faded from the spotlight, her voice is still echoing, on old records, in compilation albums, and through speakers of people who never even saw Petticoat Junction in its original run. It's one of those strange little legacies that time quietly preserves. The subtle spotlight exit. Laurie Saunders' exit from Hollywood wasn't just quiet, it was practically ghost-like. One moment, she was a familiar face on TV reruns, smiling as Bobby Joe Bradley, and the next, it was like she'd vanished. No farewell tour, no final movie or emotional goodbye interview. She didn't try to squeeze out every last drop of fame like so many others from her era. She just stopped. The strangest part was that there was no big explanation. Nothing official ever came out to say, this is why Laurie Saunders left the business. It was as if the industry moved on without asking questions. And so did she. That abruptness is what makes it feel unsettling. Here was someone who had been in people's homes week after week, who still had that youthful glow and charisma even in her later appearances, and then she was gone. No dramatic scandal, no tragic downfall, just a full stop. Fans who remembered her from Petticoat Junction or even her lesser-known film roles started noticing something was off. She didn't pop up at nostalgic reunion specials. She didn't do the fan conventions. She wasn't on talk shows reflecting on the golden days. And for someone who had such a gentle public image, her silence became louder over time. It made people wonder, was something going on behind the scenes? Did she get burned out? Pushed out? Or did she see something in Hollywood that made her want to disappear? Now, while Laurie never outright slammed the industry, there were whispers in interviews and reports over the years that she wasn't all that enchanted with the way things worked. She once mentioned how limiting the roles were and how quickly Hollywood forgets women once they're past their prime. There was no big takedown, no names dropped, but you could feel the disappointment underneath her words, like someone who had seen enough to know she didn't want to stick around and play the game anymore. Then came the more curious shifts. People who did catch glimpses of her later on said she looked different, thinner, more fragile, almost like the energy had been drained out of her. Others said she'd become more private, almost reclusive, preferring to spend time with animals rather than people. Some former co-stars tried reaching out over the years but couldn't get through. A few even said they hadn't heard from her in decades. It wasn't just retirement, it was like she'd erased herself from Hollywood altogether. And maybe that was her way of taking control. Maybe Lori saw how brutal the industry could be, how it lifted you up only to toss you aside once you didn't fit the mold anymore, and she wanted nothing to do with that cycle. So, instead of clinging to the spotlight, she let it go before it could chew her up and spit her out. Still, there's something haunting about it all. The way she slipped into silence without ever really telling her side of the story. The sudden shift in presence and appearance. The mystery of someone who once brought so much warmth into people's homes and then quietly walked away like none of it ever happened. It makes you wonder what really goes on behind the curtain, what the camera doesn't show, and who people become once the fame fades. Chilling theories about her exit. The final years of Lori Saunders' life are where things get a little eerie, unsettling even. Not in a loud or scandalous way, but in that slow, quiet kind of disappearance that creeps up on you when no one's really paying attention. Although it was abrupt and people began to ask questions, they soon began to make up their own theories, which spread like wildfire. After decades of near-total silence, fans began asking, whatever happened to Bobby Joe? Where did she go? Was she okay? But there were never any clear answers, just shadows and fragments. Lori didn't have a big public decline. There was no TMZ footage of her being wheeled out of a hospital, no tragic tell-all interview, no paparazzi catching her in a moment of desperation. In fact, part of what made her final years so strange is how little we know. The physical and emotional details are hazy at best. There were whispers, of course, rumors that she'd lost a lot of weight, that her energy was gone, that she looked almost unrecognizable in the few rare sightings that made it to public eyes. But nothing confirmed. Nothing concrete. Friends, what few remained in contact, have said in passing that Lori became more withdrawn as time went on. Some said she didn't return calls. Others admitted they hadn't seen her since the early 2000s. She reportedly spent most of her later life in a quiet, secluded home, surrounded by animals and artwork, far away from the cameras and lights that once defined her world. There were no public breakdowns, but there also wasn't much connection, just a slow, isolating fade. It's unclear if she struggled with any major illness, but people have speculated. The way she disappeared so completely, no interviews, no appearances, no social media, suggests either deep emotional burnout or something heavier like depression or cognitive decline. Again, no family member ever spoke publicly about it. If she was sick, it was kept tightly under wraps. If she was lonely, no one knew just how badly. That silence became its own kind of mystery. Some say she was forgotten by Hollywood. Others believe she wanted to be. But what really chills people is that Lori seemed to vanish right when nostalgia for the golden TV era was booming. Her co-stars were doing interviews, reunions, fan conventions. Even actors with minor roles from that time found new attention and appreciation. Lori, though, stayed hidden. She didn't even show up for retrospectives of Petticoat Junction. Not a quote, not a cameo, nothing. It's like she erased herself from the story entirely. However, fans did receive one clue about what happened to Lori, and it's more concerning than you think. One of the last known photos of Lori surfaced on a fan forum, a grainy shot taken at a grocery store years after anyone had seen her. The woman in the photo was frail, quiet, with big sunglasses and a blank stare. The person who took it said they recognized her by chance, couldn't believe their eyes, and when they said her name aloud, she looked up just long enough to nod, then walked away without a word. There's something deeply symbolic about that. A star who lit up the screen with warmth and sparkle, reduced in the end to a nameless face in a supermarket aisle, fading out of frame like a final scene no one remembered to shoot. No big farewell, no final curtain call, just stillness. Whether Lori was running from something or simply choosing peace, we may never fully know. But there's a skin-crawling quiet to her ending. A Hollywood starlet who didn't crash and burn, but slowly dissolved into the background, leaving behind questions, memories, and a strange silence that still hasn't been broken. The memory of an icon. Even though Laurie Saunders disappeared from public view, her memory didn't vanish completely. Petticoat Junction wouldn't let that happen. The show still runs in reruns, tucked into the corners of nostalgia channels and late-night schedules, reminding people of a simpler, sunnier era. And every time an episode airs, Laurie's wide-eyed charm and gentle screen presence come back to life like a time capsule that refuses to close. She might not have become a massive household name like some of her contemporaries, but within the world of classic TV, she's iconic. Fans who grew up watching her as Bobby Joe never stopped loving her. They share old clips online, trade stories in forums, and post rare magazine covers from the 60s like precious relics. She's frozen in that golden time forever, young, graceful, smiling, and for a lot of people, that's how they choose to remember her. Not as the woman who vanished from the spotlight, but as the sweet middle Bradley sister who made people laugh and feel comforted. But the deeper you think about it, the more Laurie's story starts to say something much bigger, something uncomfortable. Her vanishing act wasn't just about one person's private decision. It taps into a recurring theme in Hollywood, especially for women. You can be beloved, talented, even successful, and still be tossed aside the moment your image no longer fits the fantasy. Laurie was typecast early, boxed into the role of the wholesome beauty, and when she tried to branch out, the doors weren't exactly open. Hollywood didn't know what to do with her beyond pretty and sweet, and when she got older, it seemed like the industry just shrugged and moved on. That kind of erasure isn't new. It happens all the time, especially to actresses from her generation. They light up the screen for a while, draw millions of fans, then quietly get written out of the story once they age or stop playing the game. And most of the time, no one asks where they went. That's what makes Laurie's story feel so haunting. It's not just about her. It's about all the others like her who vanish just as quietly. And maybe that's the final, chilling question her story leaves behind. What happens to the stars when the lights go out? Not just in a poetic sense, but literally when the scripts stop coming, the calls dry up, and the cameras stop rolling. Where do they go? Who remembers them? Does anyone reach out? Or do they fade into the silence, hoping someone might notice they're gone? Laurie Saunders is still remembered, but in that eerie, bittersweet way where her presence feels more like a ghost from TV's past than a real person walking among us. She's there in reruns, frozen in time, smiling through a black and white screen, but behind that smile, there's a quiet mystery that never quite gets answered. And here's the thing, what the public saw and who Laurie really was weren't exactly the same. On camera, she was this cheerful, radiant girl next door type, but in real life, she was more introspective. She loved painting, photography, animals, stuff that had nothing to do with TV. She wasn't chasing the spotlight 24/7. In fact, once the show ended and the roles started drying up, she didn't seem to fight too hard to stay in Hollywood's good graces. She didn't cause scenes or try to reinvent herself in a tabloid-worthy way. She just quietly faded out, which kind of added to the mystery later on. That duality, being adored by the public but misunderstood or overlooked by the industry, was a defining part of her story. Hollywood made her famous, but it never really let her grow. If you worked in a Hollywood wardrobe department in the 1930s, there was one job nobody wanted: opening this girl's costume trunks. Why? Because inside were dance outfits soaked in sweat, sealed away for months, and according to this particular actress, washing them would ruin the magic. The habit begins. She wasn't just good, she was relentless. Every move had to be perfect. Every routine had to land flawlessly. And if she found something that worked, she held on to it for dear life. Her rise in the 1930s wasn't just about talent, it was about work ethic. Hollywood's top dancers trained hard, but Ginger Rogers trained harder. When she teamed up with Fred Astaire, she entered a new level of intensity. Astaire was famous for demanding perfection. He'd force retakes for hours until a routine felt effortless. Rogers didn't just keep up, she pushed herself even further. Dancing in heels? Standard. Rehearsing until her feet bled? No complaints. She wasn't going to be outperformed. But she started noticing something. When a dress fit just right, when the fabric moved the way she needed, everything clicked. The right costume could make or break a performance. That's when her superstition started. Most actors saw costumes as just clothes. Rogers saw them as lucky charms. If she nailed a performance in a particular dress, she refused to let it go. Washing it? Out of the question. She believed the sweat, the exhaustion, the energy of that perfect performance was locked into the fabric. At first, no one questioned it. Wardrobe teams set aside her favorite costumes, assuming it was just preference. But then, she stopped returning them. She'd store them unwashed, sealed away in personal trunks, convinced that keeping them untouched preserved the magic. The studio noticed. Costume designers started whispering about the growing collection. Some joked about it. Others weren't laughing. When a missing costume held up production, whispers turned into frustration. Hollywood was full of strange rituals. Actors carried lucky coins, avoided saying certain words on set, even refused to wear certain colors. But this was different. Rogers wasn't just holding onto a piece of clothing, she was building a collection of sweat-soaked memories. At first, people laughed it off. Then, they realized she wasn't joking. The first costume standoff. At first, Rogers' superstition was just an odd quirk, but as her collection of lucky costumes grew, it started causing real problems on set. The first major incident happened during the filming of Top Hat, 1935. Rogers had worn a specific blue feathered gown for a rehearsal and nailed every step. She insisted on wearing the same dress for the actual shoot, but there was one problem. The costume department needed to clean and adjust it before filming. Ginger Rogers refused. The wardrobe team pushed back. The dress had taken a beating during rehearsals, and the delicate feathers were falling apart. It needed repairs, but Rogers wasn't budging. She was convinced that even the slightest alteration could throw off her performance. Fred Astaire, known for his own perfectionism, wasn't happy. He had spent weeks rehearsing with her in that dress, and now they were on the verge of delaying production. The director, Mark Sandrich, had to step in. He tried reasoning with Rogers, explaining that the camera would pick up every stray feather and that the studio wouldn't allow her to wear something in less than perfect condition. Rogers didn't care. She argued that the weight, the feel, even the scent of the unwashed dress helped her stay in sync with the routine. She didn't trust a fresh version. If the studio wanted the best performance, she needed that exact dress, untouched. In the end, the studio made a deal. Minimal cleaning, no alterations, and no washing. The compromise kept the production moving, but it sent a message. Rogers' costume superstition wasn't just a harmless habit, she was willing to fight for it. The incident left wardrobe staff frustrated and baffled, but it wasn't the last time her obsession got in the way. Over time, it only got stranger. The dresses started disappearing entirely, locked away in her personal collection, and studio executives started taking notice. This wasn't just about luck anymore, it was about control. The vanishing costumes. At first, Ginger Rogers' costume habit seemed harmless. She liked to keep certain outfits unwashed, believing they held the energy of past performances. But as time passed, something strange started happening. Costumes went missing. By the late 1930s, wardrobe staff whispered about it. Costumes that should have been returned were nowhere to be found. At first, they assumed it was a mistake. Maybe a mix-up in storage. Maybe someone misplaced a gown. But then it kept happening, and one dress, in particular, set off alarm bells. It was during the filming of Carefree, 1938. Rogers wore a sleek silver dress for a dance sequence, a nightmare for the costume team. The fabric was delicate, wrinkled under the lights, and soaked up sweat during takes. After every scene, Assistants had to steam it out fast before the next shot. The dress required constant care. Then, when filming wrapped, it vanished. Wardrobe staff searched everywhere. Dressing rooms, storage closets, even Rogers' trailer. Nothing. The head of wardrobe reportedly went to the producers. They weren't just worried about the dress. This wasn't the first time an outfit had disappeared. Rumors flew that Rogers had taken it, but no one wanted to confront her. She was one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Accusing her of stealing costumes, that could end a career. Instead, the producers allegedly met with her in private. What happened in that meeting? No one knows for sure, but the story goes that Rogers didn't deny anything. Instead, she explained that some costumes couldn't be replaced. They weren't just fabric. They held something more. Washing them, altering them, or letting someone else wear them would erase that magic. The studio, according to whispers, was not amused. Costumes were expensive, and missing wardrobe pieces meant extra costs and delays. Some claimed the studio began making duplicates of important costumes, expecting that Rogers might take the originals. But there was no stopping her. She wasn't just keeping costumes for luck anymore. She was collecting them. And soon, the growing pile of sweat-soaked, locked-away dresses would become a real problem. Wardrobe staff had no idea what was coming next, but they wouldn't like it. The trunks no one wanted to open. By the early 1940s, Rogers' superstition had gone beyond missing costumes. Now, the problem wasn't just that she kept them, it was how she stored them. Wardrobe staff dreaded one thing above all: opening her personal trunks. By this point, Rogers' collection of sweat-soaked, unwashed costumes had grown. She refused to let them be cleaned after major performances, convinced that doing so would wash away the energy that made them special. But instead of hanging them neatly in a wardrobe, she sealed them inside trunks and rarely touched them again. At first, people assumed she was just sentimental. Plenty of actors kept mementos from their biggest films. But then came the reports. When her trunks were finally opened, the smell was overwhelming. Wardrobe assistants whispered about the state of the gowns inside. Some were stiff with dried sweat. Others showed clear signs of deterioration from being locked away for too long. Silk and delicate fabrics didn't handle time, heat, or humidity well. One particularly talked about incident supposedly happened when Rogers requested an old costume for a publicity photo shoot. A wardrobe assistant was sent to retrieve it from one of her trunks. According to crew members who later shared the story, when the trunk was opened, the smell was so strong that the assistant gagged and had to step back. Rogers didn't seem to mind. To her, these dresses were sacred relics of past performances. It wasn't about how they looked or smelled. It was about what they represented. By now, her habit was no secret among Hollywood insiders. People working on set joked about the cursed costumes, but no one dared to challenge her directly. She was too powerful, too respected, and too set in her ways. Studios may have tried to work around her obsession, but Rogers wasn't changing. If anything, she was doubling down. If a dress had brought her success, it stayed with her forever, sealed in a trunk, untouched, unwashed. Some found it odd. Others found it disgusting. But no one could ignore it. And soon, the whispers would turn into full-blown complaints. The breaking point. By the mid-1940s, people in Hollywood knew about the trunks, the unwashed gowns, and the lingering smell that wardrobe staff dreaded. But for a long time, no one pushed back. She was a box office queen, and studios weren't about to challenge their golden star over a few missing dresses. Then came the day when they had no choice. According to whispers among costume staff, the breaking point happened during the production of one of her later musicals. A key costume, a gown Rogers had worn for weeks, vanished overnight. It wasn't on the racks in storage or in the cleaning department. It was gone. This time, the loss was a big deal. The costume wasn't just an extra. It was designed specifically for continuity. Without it, they couldn't reshoot a scene if needed. The studio panicked. Producers allegedly called an emergency meeting with the wardrobe team, demanding to know who had misplaced the dress. It didn't take long before someone quietly pointed toward Rogers. The problem? No one wanted to accuse her outright. Some claimed a studio executive was sent to ask her politely if she had kept the dress. If that meeting happened, there are no official records of it. But according to insiders, Rogers was completely unfazed. She didn't argue, she didn't deny it. She simply refused to hand it back. It was her dress now, and no one was going to convince her otherwise. The studio had two options. First, confront their biggest star and risk conflict. Second, silently remake the dress and pretend nothing happened. They chose the second option. The studio's silent strategy. By the late 1940s, Ginger Rogers was still a major star, but behind the scenes, studio executives were done playing along. They had given in too many times. Costumes kept disappearing, wardrobe staff were frustrated, and now, productions had to be planned around her superstition. But no one wanted to challenge her directly. Rogers was still one of Hollywood's most bankable actresses, and causing a feud with their leading lady wasn't an option. So, instead of confronting her, the studio adapted. According to rumors from insiders, the wardrobe department quietly started making duplicates of every costume Rogers wore. If she became attached to a dress, they let her take it, but they always had a backup ready. It wasn't just about superstition anymore. It was about control. Some costumers allegedly went as far as aging the duplicates, adding fake wear and slight fabric imperfections, so they'd look like the originals. If Rogers believed a dress had absorbed the energy of a perfect performance, the wardrobe team made sure she never noticed the swap. It wasn't a perfect system. There were still times when she demanded a specific dress and wouldn't accept anything else. In those cases, they had to stall production, delay scenes, or secretly remake the piece to match. It was exhausting, frustrating, and expensive. But it was better than arguing with Rogers. Some whispered that the executives even built costume replacement costs into film budgets, treating it like an unavoidable expense, just like renting a set or hiring extras. But no matter how much planning they did, one thing they couldn't control was time. Hollywood was changing. The 1950s were bringing new stars, new trends, and a new era of filmmaking. Rogers was still a household name, but her dominance was fading. And as her power in the industry weakened, so did the studio's patience. The turning tide. By the early 1950s, the Hollywood machine was shifting fast, and Ginger Rogers wasn't the unstoppable force she once was. New faces like Marilyn Monroe and Audrey Hepburn were stealing the spotlight, musicals were evolving, and Rogers, now in her 40s, wasn't the automatic first choice for lead roles anymore. And when her power faded, so did the studio's patience. For years, executives had quietly worked around her costume superstition, making duplicates, planning for missing wardrobe pieces, and keeping production moving without making a scene. But now, Rogers wasn't the studio's top priority anymore. And suddenly, the rules started changing. Her first real wake-up call reportedly came when she wrapped a film and tried to keep a costume, only to be told no. That had never happened before. Some crew members later claimed that Rogers didn't take it well. She had spent decades getting her way, and now the studio was treating her like any other actress. But this time, there were no secret backup plans, no quiet accommodations, just a firm refusal. The industry itself had changed too. Studios were tightening budgets, cutting unnecessary costs, and cracking down on waste. Costume departments weren't as willing to remake outfits just because an actress wanted to take the original home. And without Rogers sitting at the very top of the Hollywood hierarchy, no one was afraid to push back anymore. She wasn't being pushed out completely, she was still a respected name, but the days of her superstition running the show were over. The Forgotten Trunks. As Ginger Rogers' career slowed, so did the whispers about her vanishing costumes. The studios had moved on, the costume departments had stopped indulging her habits, and Hollywood's biggest names were now younger, fresher stars. But one question remained: what happened to the trunks? The gowns weren't neatly stored in a glass case like museum pieces. They were stuffed into trunks, sealed away, some reportedly untouched for years. Crew members who had seen the inside of those trunks never forgot the smell, the result of decades-old fabric mixed with sweat and neglect. By the late 1950s, Rogers' screen time had dwindled, and she began spending more time away from the industry. She still worked occasionally, but the days of commanding full control over costumes and wardrobe were over. Some former Hollywood insiders later claimed that when Rogers finally opened some of the trunks after years, she found dresses in a shocking state. The fabrics had stiffened, some had yellowed beyond repair, and others were falling apart at the seams. But she never spoke about it publicly. Unlike other stars who auctioned off their old costumes or donated them to studios and museums, Rogers kept most of them private. Over time, some pieces surfaced in estate sales, but many were never accounted for. Some speculated that she quietly disposed of the ones that had degraded beyond saving, while others believed she held on to them until the end. What started as a superstition had turned into a collection, and by the time it was over, it was unclear even to Rogers what she had been trying to preserve. The costumes resurface. For years, Ginger Rogers' lucky costumes remained out of sight, locked away in storage. But as time passed, pieces of her collection started to reappear, some in auctions, others in unexpected places. By the 1980s, Hollywood memorabilia had become a hot market. Collectors, museums, and private buyers were desperate for anything tied to classic stars. Rogers, known for her elegance and timeless performances, had plenty of interest. But her costumes, that was another story. Some of the dresses that surfaced were pristine, well preserved by costume archives or studio storage. Others, however, showed signs of age, rumored to be from Rogers' personal collection. Reports described stiff, discolored fabric, faded sequins, and faint traces of sweat stains. Some pieces were in such poor condition that experts questioned whether they could even be restored. One particularly talked about auction featured a gown linked to Top Hat, 1935, one of Rogers' most famous films. The listing hinted that the dress had been stored away for decades, possibly by Rogers herself. While the authenticity of these claims was debated, collectors still jumped at the chance to own a piece of Hollywood history. But not all of her costumes made it to collectors. Some disappeared entirely. Whether they were lost, discarded, or still hidden away in private collections remains a mystery. The myth and the mystery. Even after Ginger Rogers was gone, the stories about her vanishing costumes never faded. Decades later, collectors, historians, and old Hollywood insiders still debated the truth. How many dresses did she actually take? Were the rumors exaggerated? And more importantly, where were they now? Some pieces had resurfaced in auctions, turning up in unexpected places. A few landed in museum collections, carefully restored and displayed. Others disappeared completely, lost to time, or hidden away in private estates. The dresses she had stashed for years, the ones she believed carried the energy of her best performances, were now just fragile relics of a Hollywood long gone. Despite the mystery, one thing was clear. Rogers' superstition wasn't just a Hollywood rumor. There were too many stories from wardrobe staff, too many whispered accounts from costume designers who struggled to keep track of missing gowns, and while no one could prove every tale, the pattern was impossible to ignore. But why did she do it? Was it really about luck, or was it something deeper? Some believed it was her way of holding on to success. Rogers had spent decades fighting for respect in an industry that rarely gave women control. Dance was precise, fleeting, gone the second a performance ended. But a costume? That was something she could keep. Others saw it as a form of control in an unpredictable business. If she could preserve the exact conditions of a perfect performance, maybe she could repeat it. Maybe she could stay on top forever. But time doesn't work that way. Hollywood moved on, and so did Rogers. In the end, the costumes, the ones she fought to keep, the ones she never washed, the ones she believed were more than just fabric, became nothing more than forgotten trunks and faded silk. Still, even now, somewhere in a collector's archive, a museum vault, or a private estate, one of Ginger Rogers' lucky costumes still exists. And if the rumors were true, it might still smell like the past. There was a time when Hollywood sweethearts were untouchable. They were adored by millions, carefully crafted by studios to be everything audiences wanted. But behind the dazzling smiles and picture-perfect romances, a much darker reality lurked. The industry that built them up had no problem tearing them down. The making of a sweetheart. In the Golden Age, studios could control an actress's life. They decided how she looked, how she spoke, and even who she could date. If a girl had beauty, innocence, and charm, the studio would work hard to make her America's next obsession. First, they would start with the looks. To be a Hollywood sweetheart, you needed to be young and fresh-faced. You had to be the type of woman audiences wanted to protect. Soft curls, bright eyes, and a warm smile. No heavy makeup or sharp features here, just a look that melts hearts. For example, Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart herself, with her iconic golden ringlets and gentle demeanor. She was the original template, and every sweetheart after her had to fit the mold in some way. But make no mistake, looks were only a part of the entire equation. Public image and how these actresses were perceived was also a big deal. The studios had entire teams dedicated to crafting these actresses' public images. PR agents went as far as writing their life stories before they had even lived them. A sweetheart needed to seem wholesome, kind, and naturally lovable. She was the girl next door who became a star. If her real background didn't match the image, no problem. The studio would rewrite her past. A troubled childhood? Erased? An unhappy marriage? Covered up. Then the publicity stunts became a thing. These actresses were always seen doing something cute or heartwarming, visiting children's hospitals, smiling for photos with puppies, going on staged innocent dates with equally beloved actors. Everything was calculated and curated to make them seem approachable. Fans had to feel like they knew them, like they could run into them at a soda shop and share a milkshake, and it worked. Audiences fell in love with women like Judy Garland, who had the voice of an angel and the face of someone you just wanted to hug. Never mind that behind the scenes, she was overworked, exhausted, and fed pills to keep up with the grueling schedule. To the world, she was just Dorothy, forever young, forever sweet. Then, Debbie Reynolds was also a part of these Hollywood sweethearts. She was the ultimate good girl, who played up her sunny personality in movies like Singin' in the Rain. Hollywood made sure she stayed in that role off-screen too, especially when her marriage to Eddie Fisher ended in scandal. She was painted as the innocent victim, the perfect girl next door wronged by love. Because that's what sweethearts did. They didn't get angry, they didn't fight back, they just smiled through the heartbreak. And let's not forget Doris Day, whose name alone sounds like sunshine. She was Hollywood's golden girl, singing about que sera, sera, while always playing the charming, independent, but never too rebellious woman. Studios kept her in that perfect, perky image for as long as they could, even as the world around her changed. These women were loved, adored, and admired, but only as long as they stayed in the boxes Hollywood put them in. The second they wanted to grow up, take on different roles, or show the world they were more than just America's sweetheart, the industry wasn't so sweet to them anymore. The expiration dates. Hollywood had a strict rule when it came to sweethearts. They had an expiration date. The industry thrived on youth and innocence, and the moment an actress started to age, sometimes even just hitting her late 20s, she was at risk of being cast aside. The very same studios that built them up had no problem replacing them with someone younger, fresher, and more marketable, and this realization was a nightmare for these sweethearts. Take Jean Seberg, for instance. She was a darling of the late 1950s, a fresh-faced beauty who seemed destined for a long career. But Hollywood had other plans. As she matured and tried to take on more serious roles, the industry lost interest. Even worse, her personal life became a target. Her involvement in political activism made her a problem for the studio system, and soon the same machine that had crafted her sweetheart image was now working against her. The pressure became unbearable, and she struggled with mental health issues until her tragic and suspicious passing at just 40. But she was not the only one on this boat. Lupe Velez was there too. She was the vibrant, energetic star known for her comedic timing and fiery personality. While she was initially adored for her unique charm, the studio system controlled nearly every aspect of her life. Her relationships were scrutinized, but when she became pregnant out of wedlock, a scandal in those days, and ruining the sweet girl image, Hollywood turned its back on her, and that was it. With no support from the industry that once profited off her name, she felt hopeless. Her life ended in tragedy, another victim of the system's impossible expectations. And of course, there were the exploitative contracts. Anybody would have given an arm and a leg to be famous, and so these sweethearts were often signed to contracts that looked glamorous on paper, but were deeply exploitative. Studios took the lion's share of their earnings, locked them into suffocating deals, and even controlled their spending. Some actresses, like Teresa Wright, dared to push back against the system, refusing to play by Hollywood's rigid sweetheart rules. She was a rare case. She survived, but at the cost of her mainstream career. Most others who tried to break free from their contracts were either blacklisted or simply allowed to fade into obscurity, left struggling to make ends meet. The pressure to stay perfect also led many actresses down dark paths. Barbara Payton, once a promising young starlet, saw her career implode after studio-driven stress led her to alcohol and destructive relationships. Hollywood didn't offer help. It simply cast her aside when she was no longer profitable. She went from starring in movies to struggling to survive, a stark reminder of how quickly the industry could discard its former darlings. For these women, being Hollywood's sweetheart was never just about talent. It was about being marketable, controllable, and eternally youthful. The moment they no longer fit that mold, the industry made sure they knew it. The dark side of fame. Fame looks really good on the surface, but for Hollywood sweethearts, it often came with a dark side that no amount of studio-crafted smiles could hide. These so-called sweethearts were dealing with awful things in the background that none of their fans would suspect. And why would they? The industry loved to present them as perfect, lovable, and untouched by scandal. But behind the scenes, many of these women were struggling in ways the public never saw. Love, for one, was rarely a fairy tale. These actresses were expected to maintain their sweetheart image even in their personal lives, which often meant being trapped in unhappy marriages or forced into relationships for good PR. Debbie Reynolds, for example, married teen heartthrob Eddie Fisher, and for a while, they were the golden couple. But when he left her for Elizabeth Taylor, Debbie wasn't just dealing with heartbreak, she was dealing with the world watching, sympathizing, and expecting her to handle it with grace. There was no space for rage, bitterness, or even healing in private. She had to keep smiling. Keep playing the role of the sweet, scorned woman, because that was what people expected. That's what the studio wanted. For others, the pressure of always being on led to dangerous coping mechanisms. Sandra Dee is another heartbreaking example. She was the ultimate fresh-faced sweetheart of the late 50s and early 60s, known for her roles in Gidget and Tammy Tell Me True. But behind her sunny, innocent image was a lifetime of trauma. She had been abused as a child, controlled by her overbearing mother, and later forced into a marriage with Bobby Darin, which, while glamorous on the outside, was filled with tension. When Hollywood moved on from her, she struggled with severe anorexia, alcoholism, and depression. By the time she passed away in 2005, she had long faded from the industry, a tragic symbol of what happened when Hollywood's sweethearts were no longer needed. Then there was Marilyn Monroe, who, despite being painted as the ultimate bombshell, still had that tragic sweetheart quality. Audiences saw her as beautiful, charming, and desirable, but few saw the lonely woman underneath. In real life, she longed for real love, for stability, but the men in her life, from Joe DiMaggio to Arthur Miller, often wanted the fantasy more than the real Marilyn. By the time she passed under mysterious circumstances in 1962, she was isolated, exhausted, and, in many ways, abandoned by the industry that had once worshipped her. But let's talk about money for a moment. Surely when you're a Hollywood sweetheart, you definitely have the financial power to drown all your sufferings and challenges, right? Well, that isn't always the case. Many sweethearts, trusting the wrong people or simply being kept in the dark about their own finances, ended up broke. Judy Garland was once one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood, but by the end of her life, she was performing in small clubs just to make ends meet. The final blow came with the way some of these women left the world. Whether it was overdoses, suicides, or circumstances that never quite added up, Their passing shook Hollywood. Some, like Marilyn, became legends, their tragic ends only adding to their mystique. Others, like Dorothy Dandridge, who was found lifeless at 42 under financially and emotionally crushing circumstances, became tales of what happens when Hollywood is done with you. But on the bright side, some sweethearts fought back. They refused to disappear, refused to let the industry decide when their time was up. Debbie Reynolds, for instance, took her pain and turned it into a powerhouse career in live performances and business, proving she was more than just a girl-next-door type. Doris Day, who had been trapped in the studio sweetheart mold for years, reinvented herself as an animal rights activist and found a new kind of purpose beyond Hollywood. Not every Hollywood sweetheart got her happy ending, but the ones who did, they wrote their own story, no longer letting Hollywood do it for them. The downfall. Let's get it straight. Hollywood sweethearts didn't disappear overnight. Their downfall was a slow unraveling, piece by piece, as audiences started to crave something different. You see, for decades, the wholesome, wide-eyed good girl was the gold standard. People wanted to believe in the innocent, untouchable, larger-than-life stars that studios carefully packaged and sold. But as time went on, the cracks started to show. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, moviegoers were changing. The world itself was changing. The post-war optimism that had made America fall in love with sweethearts was starting to wear off, replaced with rebellion, counterculture, and a desire for something real. Audiences weren't as easily fooled anymore. They had seen too many PR romances, too many actresses forced to play the same roles on and off screen. The sweetheart image that was once a selling point started to feel artificial and outdated. Actresses who were once adored for their purity suddenly found themselves out of place in a shifting Hollywood, and one of these actresses was Sandra Dee. Sandra was a sweetheart of the late 1950s and early 1960s, but as the 60s progressed, her style of charm started to feel too old-fashioned. The rise of actresses like Faye Dunaway and Jane Fonda, women who played complex, independent, and even morally ambiguous roles, meant there was little room left for the girl-next-door type. Sandra Dee's career faded fast, and she later admitted that she never knew how to transition beyond the role Hollywood had built for her. Another actress who struggled here was Doris Day. For years, she was America's beloved golden girl, known for her sunny personality and squeaky clean image. But as the sexual revolution of the late 60s took hold, audiences wanted bolder, more daring female leads. Day's romantic comedies, where she played chaste but charming women, suddenly felt outdated in a world that was embracing the rise of more sexually liberated and defiant female characters. Studios tried to modernize her image, but it was too late. The era of the sweetheart was fading fast. But here's what most people miss about this downfall of Hollywood sweethearts. The decline wasn't just about changing tastes, it was also about exposure. The studio system had controlled everything for decades, hiding scandals and keeping their stars in line. But as the press became more aggressive and stars gained more independence, the truth started coming out. The public learned that many of their beloved sweethearts had been living anything but wholesome lives behind closed doors. The rise of tabloid journalism, paparazzi culture, and more invasive media coverage meant that the carefully crafted facades weren't so easy to maintain anymore. Shirley Temple used to be Hollywood's most famous child star, a symbol of pure innocence. But when she tried to transition into adult roles, audiences weren't interested. The public had loved her as a little girl, but they didn't want to see her grow up. She later revealed how difficult it was to break free from the identity that had been forced on her. And once she left Hollywood, she exposed many of the darker truths of the industry, including the harassment and exploitation she had endured as a young actress. Even the sweethearts who wanted to adapt and evolve struggled. Debbie Reynolds tried to shift into more serious, dramatic roles, but Hollywood still saw her as the girl next door. When she moved into television, she had to fight to keep her career alive while younger, edgier actresses took center stage. The rise of actresses like Barbra Streisand, who had a completely different, more unconventional appeal, signaled that audiences were no longer looking for perfection. They wanted something real, flawed, and human. By the 1970s, the Hollywood sweetheart was practically extinct. The film industry had moved into grittier, more realistic storytelling, and the wholesome, innocent female lead had no place in that world. Actresses like Sybil Shepherd, Diane Keaton, and even a young Meryl Streep took on roles that were messy, complicated, and unpredictable, everything the classic sweethearts had never been allowed to be. The downfall of Hollywood sweethearts wasn't just about aging out of the system. It was about the world realizing they had been sold an illusion. The more people saw behind the curtain, the less they believed in the perfection they had once idolized. What had once been the ideal became a relic of a bygone era, something people now viewed as naive, restrictive, and ultimately fake. Hollywood had built the sweethearts up, and slowly but surely, Hollywood and the audience tore them down. The attempted comebacks. Many Hollywood sweethearts, once discarded by the industry that made them, tried to claw their way back into relevance. Some reinvented themselves, some pivoted to entirely different careers, and others found that no matter how hard they tried, Hollywood had already moved on without them. Take Anne Baxter, for instance. She had been a young, glamorous leading lady in the 1940s, even winning an Oscar for The Razor's Edge. But as she aged, the roles dried up. Instead of fading into obscurity, she tried to reinvent herself on television, taking on roles in shows like Batman and the Love Boat. She even turned to Broadway, proving her talent extended beyond the rigid confines of Hollywood's sweetheart mold. But despite her efforts, she never fully regained her former status. Hollywood had already crowned its new darlings. Then, let's also talk about Veronica Lake. She had been one of the most glamorous stars of the 1940s, known for her signature peekaboo hairstyle and sultry screen presence. But as trends shifted, she was pushed out, struggling with alcoholism and financial ruin. In a desperate attempt to revive her career, she wrote a memoir in the 1960s, hoping to remind the world of who she had been. The book gained some attention, and she even managed to land a few minor roles. But it was too little, too late. Hollywood wasn't interested in a comeback story. It had already replaced her with the next big thing. On the other hand, some sweethearts found success by stepping behind the camera or leaving Hollywood altogether. Ida Lupino, once known for her beauty and charm, refused to accept the expiration date stamped on most actresses' careers. Instead of waiting for good roles to come her way, she became one of the first successful female directors in Hollywood, helming films like The Hitchhiker and The Bigamist. She proved that reinvention was possible, but only if an actress was willing to break free from the industry's expectations. But for every success story, there were countless actresses who tried to stay relevant and failed. Joan Leslie, once a fresh-faced sweetheart of the 1940s, attempted to return to Hollywood in the 50s and 60s, but by then no one remembered the girl-next-door image she had once been famous for. Even in smaller roles, she struggled to find work. Hollywood, for all its love of nostalgia, had no patience for women who had aged out of their prime. The tragedy of Hollywood's sweethearts wasn't just that they were discarded, it was that their attempts to return were often met with indifference. The industry that once adored them had a short memory, and for many, no amount of talent or reinvention could bring them back into the spotlight. The new sweetheart concept. The Hollywood sweetheart may have faded as a rigid cookie-cutter persona, but the essence of it never truly disappeared. Instead, it evolved. The industry learned from the mistakes of the past. Audiences no longer wanted flawless, impossibly perfect women who seemed untouchable. They wanted charm, warmth, and relatability. But with an edge. The modern sweetheart isn't about being prim, proper, and protected by studio executives. She's approachable, down to earth, and most importantly, real. Or at least, she seems that way. In the 90s and early 2000s, Julia Roberts and Sandra Bullock carried the torch, but in a way that felt fresh. Julia Roberts, with her megawatt smile and effortless charm, was a sweetheart, but she wasn't passive or fragile like the sweethearts of old. Whether in Pretty Woman, Notting Hill, or Erin Brockovich, she played women who had depth, flaws, and agency. Sandra Bullock, on the other hand, became America's rom-com darling with movies like While You Were Sleeping and Miss Congeniality. But unlike the sweethearts of the golden age, her characters weren't just waiting for love to find them. They were funny, awkward, and often the underdog. Then came the next evolution. Actresses like Jennifer Lawrence and Emma Stone brought a more modern take on the sweetheart archetype. But instead of being polished and poised, They leaned into being quirky and self-deprecating. Jennifer Lawrence tripped on her way to accept her Oscar, cracked jokes about food in interviews, and gave off a vibe of being the cool girl who doesn't take herself too seriously. Emma Stone, with her girl-next-door appeal, followed a similar path, blending charm with wit and intelligence. These actresses weren't untouchable, they were relatable, even goofy at times. Something that would have been unthinkable for the sweethearts of old Hollywood, who were expected to maintain an aura of perfection at all times. The biggest difference between then and now is control. The old Hollywood sweethearts were molded by studios, their images micromanaged down to the last detail. They weren't allowed to break character, even in real life. Today, actresses have far more control over their careers and public personas. They can poke fun at themselves, take on grittier roles without ruining their image, and step away from Hollywood without being permanently exiled. That said, some things haven't changed. There's still a demand for a certain kind of woman to be America's sweetheart. There's still an expectation that these actresses be likable, charming, and not too controversial. And just like before, Hollywood has a tendency to move on when a new, younger version comes along. The sweetheart may not be as rigidly defined as she once was, but she still exists, just in a more adaptable, self-aware form.